that's suspicious. Then they identified certain things on the ship, and they said, yes, it was a French ship, you know, built in France. Then they found some papers that were stuffed inside a gun with wadding put there so that you could still read the papers, you know, sort of. And they said, yeah, they figured out from reading the papers. They didn't see Edward Teach's name, but from reading the papers, that was an identifying mark that they could tell it was that ship. That if you go to one of the North Carolina's maritime museums, and I don't know if it's there's one on Beaufort, there's one at Hatteras, and there's one down at Southport near Wilmington. And one of those maritime museums has a lot of these artifacts from the Queen Anne's Revenge there in that ship. So that is what was going on. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer. Any questions? Yes.
How did you get so interested in this?
Well, I don't know. A certain person on the back row said, "Why don't you give a talk about Blackbeard?" You know, so you know, I got this book, and it's kind of tough reading. I mean, it goes into great detail, and the big problem, and he kind of skips around, but the big problem is the TP, tiny print, small print. So, yeah. So anyhow, with a lot of time and much use of magnifying glasses, I managed to get something out of it. Now this author, if you go online and read about and there's all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I mean, if you go online and read about Blackbeard or like that, a lot of times they reference this guy, this author. So he must know his stuff, you know. And he quotes a lot from Captain Johnson, you know, but then he says this may or may not be true. You know, he's very good. So he's a good writer, but it was difficult for me to read. So that is the story about Blackbeard, and that is all I know. So if you have any more questions, I'll try to. Yes?
Wasn't there a war going on between England and the United States just before that?
There was something called the War of Spanish Succession, and somehow the Spanish, they got into it with certain. It wasn't like the.
I thought it was with England and the United States.
Not really. No, I don't think so. Not then. That came later. That came later. They had the French and Indian War was later.
Oh no.
And then the American Revolution.
Before the 1715.
There was some difficulty with up in the northern part with the Spanish were arguing about some tribes and this kind of thing, but it wasn't a full-blown war. The colonists at that time, they were full-bore English then. I mean, there was no doubt about it. It was another 60 years before they started having their disagreements with the colonists. Yeah. And by that time, North Carolina had gotten a little better. The big produce from Virginia was tobacco, and from South Carolina, I mentioned, was rice. North Carolina, not so much, because they had, you know, they hadn't gotten very far then. That came later. Yes.
Did he have a fortune, and what happened to it?
Oh, good question. Thank you. Over the years, people have dug holes all around Bath. From what I read, looking for buried treasure, and nobody's found anything.
Nobody's found it.
That we know of, unless they did it in the middle of the night. Nobody's found anything. Wasn't long before Edenton was the state capital, just a few years later, and that's where Governor Eden's plantation was. And then later it was New Bern, and then it was Raleigh. So it took a while. Any more questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.